Kujou Sara is one of Genshin Impact's newest 4-star support, and she's rather mediocre. It doesn't mean she sucks. In comparison to like character like Xinyan or Chi-Chi who really sucks, Kujou Sara is a okay character, but that's pretty much it. She's rather okay or just mediocre at the current moment. A lot of people like to compare her to Bennett a lot, but that's not really a fair comparison. You guys have to understand that Bennett is a super broken character. If Kujou Sara were comparable to Bennett, it would mean that she is also a super broken character, and we don't really want that because that's what we call power creep. Nevertheless, one of the biggest problems of Kujou Sara is simply Bennett exists, and if you can run Bennett over Kujou Sara, you pretty much would always run Bennett over Kujou Sara. Once again, not because Kujou Sara sucks, but because Bennett is just too good. That's not to say Kujou Sara doesn't have any problem, and that's what we're gonna look into it today. Kujou Sara elemental skill teleport you backward and allow your next charge attack to do this explosion. The character who get hit by the explosion will have their attack increase according to a proportion of Kujou Sara base attack as well, similar to Bennett. Note that the explosion is what generates energy for your attack. So here, I need to hit the enemy with the charge attack explosion to generate energy, and there I didn't hit it, so I didn't get any energy. But here, if I hit the charge attack here, you see that now it will generate the Electro particle. It generates 3 Electro particle. Immediately, we observe the first problem on Kujou Sara, and it's, in my opinion, a pretty big one. Her elemental skill is supposed to teleport you backward, like that. But for some reason, it doesn't always teleport you back and leading you to get interrupted by enemy. Here you can see Kujou Sara did not teleport me back, and therefore when I tried to do a charge attack, it got interrupted because I was right in the face of the enemy. Even though your charge attack will come out quicker, it still takes like 0.5 seconds to come out, making you very vulnerable to interruption. Kujou Sara elemental burst leash out a lot of lightning, and the character who gets struck by lightning will have their attack increase as well, similar to her elemental skill. Now know that Kujou Sara only gives you an attack bonus for 6 seconds, and commonly people would complain, oh my god, this is so short when other characters have a much longer buff. And it is true that 6 seconds is short, but you have to understand that it is not as short as most people think. The thing about, for example, Kaze is that his elemental buff lasts for 8 seconds. And 8 seconds include swap time. So what happened is that you would, let's say you would do a facial electro, and you would do this infusion, and you swap. And the swap process take about 1.5 seconds, and so the actual duration of the buff you get is like 6.5 seconds-ish. On the other hand, Kujou Sara, you can do the charge attack first, and then switch character before it explodes. So now you start counting the 6 seconds, and that doesn't include the swap time anymore. Because of that, the actual duration of buff that you get from character like Kazuha and Kujou Sara is very similar. Now the attack buffs, just like other buffs in the game, can be snapshotted when you're using character like Beidou or Xiangling, so the duration on the attack buff don't matter at all as long as you're properly snapshotting it. For other characters, especially one like Raiden, where all her damage is dished out in a very short period of time, the short duration of the Kujou Sara buff also doesn't matter that much as well. So overall, 6 seconds on her attack buff, while it's nice to be longer, but it's definitely long enough to matter. In fact, the explosion delay is long enough that you can actually switch character twice. So what that means is, first I'll cast my elemental skill, and then I'll do a charge attack. And before the charge attack pop off, I'm gonna switch character twice. So here you can see that the explosion came after I switched to Sucrose and then Beidou. And you'll notice that I have a bunch of attack bonus now because I was able to get the Thrilling Tail buff from Sucrose as well as the attack bonus from Kujou Sara. And you'll note that just to make sure the buff didn't go on Sucrose, you'll see that there's no buff on Sucrose right now. Of course, this technique requires you to be very good at your rotation as well as having very high APM. Because of that, Kujou Sara will take time to get used to. You will have to practice the technique and you will have to master the technique. This makes Kujou Sara much harder to play than other characters like Sucrose or Bennett as a support. But of course, if you're not using a book with her, then just casting her Q for the attack buff is good enough and you don't have to do complex rotation like that. Kujou Sara consellation are also just okay. I wouldn't say they're great. For example, Constellation wants to simply decrease your elemental skill cooldown by 1 second. But because usually you want to swap off after you use your elemental skill, that 1 second doesn't really do anything. Now we move on to Constellation 2, which is one of the bigger one. A lot of people think that Kujou Sara is unplayable without Constellation 2, when that is not true at all. In fact, Constellation 2 is actually not as useful as most people think. Since hitting the charge attack is necessary for you to generate energy, you still want to use your charge attack almost all the time if you're playing her in an Electro team, which you should be doing. Of course, if you're just putting her in some jank team for the attack buff, then it's whatever. Then the Constellation 2 will help a lot for a quality of life because it saves you from doing that charge attack. So it's not like Constellation 2 is completely useless. Constellation 2 also let Kujou Sara get the attack buff herself, so it let her do a little bit extra damage when she eventually do the follow-up charge attack or other attack like her elemental burst. So overall, Constellation 2 is not as big as people think, but it's still a really good constellation, mostly on the quality of life. And then we have the standard upgrade talent for Constellation 3. Constellation 4 is a pretty good damaging constellation for fighting against large enemy. Large enemy like the Asa can get hit by multiple lightning, and so you can do a lot of damage, but fighting against regular enemy, this is not gonna happen. And then of course we have another upgrade talent, and then we move on to Constellation 6, which is really good for Electro character, but only for Electro characters. It increased their crit damage by 60%, but unlike other buff in the game, this buff here do not snapshot, and this buff only lasts for 6 seconds. So for example, if you get a buff on your Beidou for the attack buff will snapshot on her elemental burst, but the crit damage buff will not snapshot and will only last for 6 seconds. Once again, for a character like Raiden, who dish out all her damage in a short period of time, this doesn't matter as much, but for Beidou, who lasts 15 seconds on her elemental burst, this is a pretty big deal. Fortunately, you can just cast her elemental burst in the middle of your Beidou burst because it doesn't snapshot. In this case, you will refresh the buff and therefore get the crit damage bonus again. With all of those being said, Kujou Sara is definitely not as bad as most people think, but it definitely takes some time to get used to her, and it takes skill to master playing her for your rotation and stuff. But here is the problem. The problem is that there are so many other options. So in what case does Kujou Sara really shine, aside from the obvious pairing, which is Sara Raiden? For example, once again at the beginning of the video I said it's not fair to compare Sara to Bennett because Bennett is just way too broken. Bennett just do every single thing in the game. In fact, Bennett is the most broken character in the game, right? So if Sara was equivalent to Bennett, then it would be power creeping. But the fact remains is that Bennett is still a stronger character, so why would I bring Sara when I can just bring Bennett? And that fact is still true. Similarly, this is the case for a lot of other existing characters as well. There are Fischl as an Electro support who can do a lot of damage and generate a lot of good Electro energy. While Fischl doesn't have the attack buff that Sara have, Fischl herself will do a lot more damage than Sara would, and therefore just balances out. If you really want an attack buff, you can just bring Lisa with the Thunder or Dragon Slayer book, which immediately gives you 48% buff, and you don't need to put any investment into your Lisa. Your Lisa can be level 1, your book can be level 1, and you will get as much attack percent bonus as a Kujou Sara, unless your Kujou Sara is really invested. For example, like level 90, maybe level 80, with really high talent and a really high level weapon. And that's what it takes to beat a level 1 Lisa with a level 1 book, and that's just not really appealing. You could pair Eula together with Sara, however, do know that Sara buff only lasts for 6 seconds, but Eula takes 7 seconds to pop her elemental burst, unless you decide to pop it early. So in this case, you will have to pop Eula elemental burst early, but it kinda works, I suppose. Going back to the earlier topic, Fischl, and compared to Sara, has been on multiple banners by now. She's a character that was available in the very beginning of Genshin Impact. We even got a copy of Fischl for free at the very early stage of Genshin Impact. Because of that, most players might have a invested Fischl already. Not just the invested Fischl, but a really invested Fischl, especially on her constellation, which some of these are really good, like increasing her elemental skill level by 3, or especially her C6. So the chances is that if you put investment on your Fischl, the chances that she will perform better than Sara, at least in the Beidou team. That's not to say Sara is strictly worse than Fischl or even Lisa. Because Sara is only on one banner right now, most players probably don't have high constellation on their Sara, but if you do have constellation 6, then Sara once again will become a better support when they compare to Fischl for a Beidou team. On top of that, Sara have much better energy generation for Beidou because all her energy is funneled into one, while for a character like Fischl, her energy is generated across the entire fight. And the same goes for Lisa. With the recent patch, they remove the ability to tap your elemental skill to generate energy, assuming that you have Constellation 1. So Lisa have really horrible generation as well. Because of that, Sara will win in terms of energy generation by a lot. Here you can see it's very easy to funnel your energy into Beidou because they come in batch and they come after a delay. So this makes her a lot easier to fund Beidou on. Overall, currently there's only 2 real teams that you can fit Sara in. You can put Sara Beidou or you can pitch Sara Raiden. You could put Sara in other situation if you want, for example, if you really want to attack buff to, I don't know, do some clickbait or to do some one shot, that you could do. Interestingly enough is that the build you build on Sara will also change depending on your team a lot. For starter, keep in mind that Kujou Sara, similar to Bandit, scale with your base attack only. That means attack percent on your artifact do not increase the buff that you get. Because of that, using a 5-star weapon like Scourheart, which have a higher base attack than 4-star weapon, could be very beneficial if you can spare one. Otherwise, for the 4-star weapon, if you are pairing her with Beidou, then Sacrificial Bow is more recommended because it lets you double cast your elemental skill, generating a lot more energy for Beidou. It also has a really nice energy recharge substat, which you really need when you're pairing her with Beidou because you're lacking Electro energy. However, if you are pairing her with Raiden, then you don't need that much energy and you definitely don't need the Sacrificial Bow. In this case, going for a more damaging heavy option like the Alley Hunter could be beneficial. For artifact set, if you are putting her in the Beidou team, then Tenacity is actually the recommended set, and this might be surprising to a lot of people. This set is really easy to proc and to snapshot on Beidou, so therefore the 3-second duration don't matter because you are going to be snapshotting that bonus onto Beidou. And again, it's really easy to proc because you will cast Kujou Sara elemental skill right before you switch to Beidou, and there's a delay. So by the time you switch to Beidou, the set will proc come into time exactly, and then you can snapshot it, and therefore it is fine. You could switch to the other set Nobles as well, which also gives you 20% attack buff, but that will require you to cast your elemental burst before you switch to Beidou, which just doesn't really fit into your rotation that well, and therefore it's actually lesser recommended. But if you're pairing her with Raiden, then the 4-set Nobles is definitely fine because you will cast your elemental burst before Raiden in this case. And if you don't care to have Nobles in your party or you just want Sara to do a lot of damage, then you can just use the 4-set Emblem set, which is really good. Or you can use like 2 Nobles, plus 2 Shiminara, or plus 2 Gladiator, or plus 2 Thunder Fury. Any 4 of the 2 will pretty much work. Or you could also go for the 4-set bonus on the Thunder Smoother, which is right here. The 4-set Thunder bonus on Thunder Smoother, which increases your damage against opponent affected by Electro by 35%. And for main stat, same as always, crit rate or crit damage on your Circlet, Electro damage on your Goblet, and then attack percent on your Sands. And for a substat, look for either attack, crit damage, crit rate, ER, whatever, okay? Same as always. If you want, you could switch to a ER Sands, but honestly, it is not necessary. Getting some ER on your substat, and especially getting ER on your Sacrificial Bow is good enough, because you should be pairing her as a double Electro team, either Sara Beidou or Sara Raiden. In both cases, you have double Electro, so it's fine. Now, if you look at her A4, you might think, oh, I should build a lot of energy recharge on this. But even if you build like 200 energy recharge, you only get 1 extra energy. 1 single extra energy. Not 1 particle, but 1. So honestly, it don't matter. Just ignore this. This like doesn't exist, okay? It don't exist. Overall, I think that Sara is a rather mediocre character, but at the end of the day, she is still a functional one. I think a lot of people have an impression that she is really bad. like Xinyan bad, but that's not true. People have the impression, she is so clunky, and that is true because she takes charge attack and her teleport doesn't work. But people also have this narrative, she's Electro, so she has to be bad. That's just not true at all. Right now, Sara still have some team that she belong in and work really well in. Noticeably when you put Sara and Beidou together, or when you put Sara to Raiden together. This especially work really well. For Beidou, you have Fischl, or you can just put Lisa, although Fischl is probably the preferred one. Because of that, Sara is definitely less desired. But at the end of the day, you will notice that most, especially the 4-star support, only fit into 1 or 2 category. You have Chongyun, which only fit into freeze team now because National kicked them out. You have Sucrose, which only fit into reaction team. But every single top team like Xiangling is reaction team. That's why Sucrose appear to be so strong. On top of the fact that she can carry the book. You have Barbara, which is like, what is this? You have like Xinyan, which is like, what is this? You have Fiona, which is a really good crowd support and fit really well into crowd team. But outside of crowd team, she doesn't really fit into other team that well. And then you have Xingqiu, who is a god. But my point is, it's fine to have a 4-star support that only do 1 or 2 things, as long as they do that 1 or 2 thing good enough. And for Sara, it is true that she takes skill to do those things, but I think that's fine. It's fine to take skill to play the game, guys. Sara's primary use case is to replace Bennett in an Electro team so that you can put Bennett into your other party. And she does do really well, on top of the fact that she generates Electro energy way better than Bennett because Bennett is not an Electro character. At the end of the day, it is true that Sara is mediocre in my opinion, but Bennett is just simply too good, and expecting to get a second Bennett is honestly just not a fair comparison. I think people are too disappointed because we didn't get a second Bennett, but I don't think that's the right mindset. Sara is definitely not garbage, and I think that she does deserve a little bit of credit where currently people are not giving it enough. Nevertheless, Sara is a okay character, and she fit well into Raiden team, Beidou team again, and that's honestly good enough for me. With that being said, I hope to see you guys all next time, so please hit the subscribe button, like, comment, and I'll see you all next time.